The year was 2011, a dark age for digital creators where rendering a simple 720p video sounded like a jet engine preparing for takeoff in your living room. Content creation wasn't a glamorous career path paved with sponsorships and ring lights. It was a grueling, misunderstood grind. I learned this the hard way when a prestigious university hired me to single-handedly launch their digital branding campaign. For a meager $2,200 a month, I sold my soul, my sleep, and my personal equipment to a bloated bureaucratic machine. But looking back, I wouldn't change a single agonizing second of it. Because hidden beneath the impossible quotas, the toxic micromanagement, and a revenge plot that cost the university a small fortune, I found the two things that actually mattered: a six-figure payout and the love of my life. I sat in a windowless office that smelled faintly of damp cardboard and floor wax, staring at the progress bar on my personal laptop. It crept forward with agonizing sluggishness. The university's own hardware was tragically archaic, incapable of handling a simple crossfade without crashing, which meant my own overworked machine was bearing the brunt of the institution's grand digital ambitions. The door creaked open, and Odelia slipped in. She was a junior copywriter in the marketing department, armed with two steaming cups of terrible breakroom coffee. Odelia had a sharp, observational wit and eyes that always seemed to be calculating the exact absurdity of any given situation. She set a cup next to my glowing keyboard. "You look like you're trying to set the motherboard on fire with your mind, Torin," she murmured, leaning against the edge of my desk. Her proximity brought a faint, welcome scent of vanilla and rain cutting through the sterile office air. "I might have to," I replied, rubbing my temples. "Briani just handed down my KPIs, 85 videos, 3 to 10 minutes long. Within 52 weeks." Odelia choked on her coffee. "85 for a one-man team. You have to script, cast, shoot, light, edit, and score everything yourself. That's mathematically impossible." I told her that, I sighed. She gave me that terrifying, patronizing smile and told me to just give it a try, and that if the quality was high, the quantity wouldn't matter. "Don't trust the smile," Odelia warned, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Briani operates on corporate sociopathy. Just survive. And let me know if you need an extra set of hands holding a boom mic." For the first 4 weeks, I practically lived in that windowless box. I worked 6 days a week, pushing past 60 hours, surviving on vending machine pretzels and sheer stubbornness. Briani, my manager, was relentlessly pleasant, dropping by to offer saccharine praise while offering absolutely zero budget for royalty-free music or proper lighting. I composed synth tracks on a pirated keyboard program just to avoid copyright strikes. But the fragile piece shattered on a rainy Tuesday. I had slipped out to the loading dock for a cigarette, desperate for 5 minutes away from a timeline that refused to sync. I was stubbing out the filter when the heavy metal door swung open. Briani stood there, her pastel cardigan practically vibrating with sudden, rigid tension. Her eyes darted from the crushed cigarette to my face. The saccharine smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound, visceral disgust. She didn't say a word. She just pivoted on her heel and marched back inside. When I returned to the marketing floor, Odelia took one look at me and let out a heavy sigh, dragging a palm down her face. "She caught you, didn't she?" Odelia asked, pulling me into the supply closet. "I was just having a smoke. It's a legal habit." "Not in Briani's universe," Odelia whispered, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. "She despises smokers. 2 years ago, she campaigned to get the head graphic designer fired because he smelled like tobacco in a morning stand-up. You are officially on her hit list, Torin." Odelia was right. The shift was immediate and brutal. Suddenly, my daily 4 hours of unpaid overtime were ignored, but stepping into the office at 9:06 a.m. resulted in a blistering, passive-aggressive email CCing the entire department. She complained that my clothes carried the scent of smoke, forcing me to buy a fresh bottle of cologne and douse myself before entering the building. She scheduled mandatory progress alignments during my only lunch breaks. Yet I soldiered on. The videos I did manage to publish were pulling in the highest engagement the university had ever seen. I was proud of the work. And if I was being entirely honest, the late nights editing were made bearable by Odelia. She started staying late too, claiming she had copy to revise. But mostly she sat on the worn sofa in my edit bay, reading aloud from terrible student brochures to make me laugh, or wordlessly massaging the tension out of my shoulders when my laptop crashed. A quiet, undeniable gravity was pulling us together, forged in the trenches of corporate misery. By month 5, I had delivered 30 high-quality videos. It was a Herculean feat for a solo producer. But as I was rendering video 31, my desk phone rang. It was Briani, asking me to join her in the director's office. Vance, the director of communications, was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way devout men looked at holy texts. He didn't care about the art, he cared about the cell block. As I sat across from his massive oak desk, I glanced at Briani. She was wearing a look of deep, sorrowful concern that didn't quite reach her eyes, which were dancing with malicious glee. Torin, Vance began, his voice dry as dust. We are nearly halfway through the year. You have completed 30 videos. The KPI is 85. The math is not in your favor. I leaned forward. Vance, I've been working 60-hour weeks. The engagement metrics are through the roof. We discussed that quality would supersede the raw quota. I never agreed to that, Briani interrupted, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I simply said we'd evaluate. And frankly, Torin, the lack of professionalism and the constant odor has been disruptive. We need someone who can hit the targets. It's a one-man department, I argued, my blood turning to ice. Nobody can hit 85 videos alone. How do you even plan to finish the slate? Briani let out a soft, condescending snort. We'll find a professional production house to finish your work. People who actually understand scale. Vance gave her a slightly alarmed look. Production houses were notoriously expensive, but he offered a stiff nod. Manager Briani will handle the transition. We are terminating your contract effective immediately. I stood up, my jaw tight. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I walked back to my windowless office to pack my gear. Odelia was waiting there, having seen the calendar invite. When she saw my face, her expression hardened. They actually did it, she said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. Briani wants to hire a professional production house, I replied, shoving hard drives into my backpack. Which is funny, considering she doesn't know the first thing about the local video industry. As the resident content professional, one of my secondary duties had been maintaining the university's vendor database, a massive spreadsheet of local production houses, directors, and gear rental companies, just in case we ever secured a budget for a massive shoot. Briani had zero contacts of her own. She would rely entirely on that list. I sat back down at the university desktop. With slow, deliberate keystrokes, I opened the master database. I changed phone numbers. I deleted email domains. I swapped contact names with local pizza parlors and defunct fax lines. I systematically destroyed every single entry, rendering the entire database useless, except for one. I left a single, pristine entry at the very top of the list. It belonged to a production house where an old college friend of mine, Darius, worked as a junior director. Darius was talented but stuck in the mud, constantly passed over for major projects. "What are you doing?" Odelia asked, leaning over my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. "I'm setting a trap," I whispered, looking up at her. The anger in her eyes had morphed into something fiercely admiring. "Meet me at the bruised leather booth at O'Malley's tonight. I need an inside woman." Odelia didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." That evening, over cheap draft beer and sticky wooden tables, Odelia and I laid out the battle plan. The dim lighting of the pub cast shadows across her face, making her look like a conspirator in a heist movie. She slid a folded napkin across the table. Written on it were Briani's exact buzzwords, Vance's preferred metric structures, and the hidden aesthetic preferences the university chancellor secretly obsessed over. "This is everything," I said, staring at the ink. I looked up at Odelia, realizing in that moment that I was entirely, hopelessly in love with her. She had risked her own job to steal this intelligence for a guy who had just been fired. I reached out, covering her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her palm up and laced her fingers through mine. "Take them for everything they have," she whispered. I stepped outside and called Darius. I laid out the entire situation. I told him I possessed the ultimate playbook to secure a 6-month, high six-figure contract from a desperate university manager. It would catapult his career, making him the undisputed golden boy of his agency. In exchange, I wanted the industry-standard finder's fee, 15% of the total contract. Darius didn't even blink. He patched his general manager onto the line. When the GM heard the sheer scale of the guaranteed work, he practically wept with joy. A contract guaranteeing my 15% cut was drawn up and digitally signed within the hour. 2 days later, Briani, frustrated by a database full of disconnected numbers, finally dialed the one contact that worked. Darius and his team were called in to pitch. Armed with Odelia's insider intelligence, Darius walked into Vance's boardroom and delivered a masterpiece. He used Briani's exact vocabulary. He presented mood boards that perfectly aligned with the Chancellor's secret tastes. He promised a blistering turnaround time that would easily hit the 85 video KPI. Vance and Briani were so astounded by this perfect fit that they signed the agency on the spot. What Briani failed to understand, in her desperate bid to prove me replaceable, was the economics of professional production in 2011. A real production house didn't operate like a desperate 20-something with a laptop. They had a director of photography, a gaffer, sound engineers, production assistants, and dedicated editors. Each video they produced cost roughly triple my monthly salary, but true to their word, the agency was a machine. They churned out 50 videos in 4 months. They hit the quota. Briani got to parade around the marketing department, boasting about her brilliant management skills. Meanwhile, I didn't lift a finger. I sat in my apartment, went on actual dates with Odelia that didn't involve vending machine pretzels, and watched my bank account swell. That 15% finder's fee amounted to 15 months of my previous salary, deposited straight into my checking account in a lump sum. With the money secured, I applied to a prestigious film school in Europe to finish my master's. But before that, I booked a month-long trip to Bali. I asked Odelia to come with me. She handed in her 2 weeks' notice to Briani the very next morning, citing a desire to pursue artistic endeavors. A month later, I was lying on a sun-drenched rattan lounger in Seminyak. The air was thick with the scent of frangipani and ocean salt. Odelia was beside me, her skin golden, sipping a drink out of a hollowed-out coconut. Her phone, resting on the small wooden table between us, began to buzz frantically. She picked it up, reading a long string of text messages from the graphic designer who had survived Briani's reign of terror. A slow, wicked smile spread across Odelia's lips. "What is it?" I asked, lowering my sunglasses. "The bill came due," Odelia laughed, tossing the phone onto my chest. I read the texts. The university's finance department had finally audited the marketing division's quarterly spend. The content creation project, which had originally been budgeted for roughly a year and a half of my meager salary, had exceeded its budget by over 10 times. In her blind desperation to hit the KPI and prove Vance right, Briani had signed off on every single invoice Darius sent over, utterly ignoring the ballooning costs. The Chancellor had summoned Vance and Briani into a closed-door meeting that reportedly involved a lot of screaming. Vance, furious at being blindsided by the financial ruin, threw Briani entirely under the bus. Briani was fired on the spot, escorted out of the building by security. Vance was given a massive formal reprimand and stripped of his budgetary authority. And Darius, his agency was paid in full because the contracts were ironclad. He was promoted to full director, given his own office and a dedicated team. I handed the phone back to Odelia, the sound of the crashing waves suddenly sounding like a standing ovation. She leaned over, tracing the line of my jaw with her thumb before kissing me, a taste of coconut, salt, and absolute victory. We had beaten the machine. Sometimes the universe doesn't balance the scales on its own. Sometimes you have to nudge the weights yourself. If you ever find yourself facing a toxic environment that demands the impossible while treating you like dirt, don't just get mad, get smart. Know your worth, secure your leverage, and let their own arrogance be the anchor that drags them down. Protect your peace, and never let a terrible boss convince you that you aren't capable of greatness. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me in the comments about a time you outsmarted a terrible manager. Until next time, keep creating and never settle for less than you deserve.